So, welcome everyone to the second Wednesday keynote at the Love Tutoring Festival, to Wednesday the 26th of January here at 11 a.m. GMT. And I am delighted to welcome Managing Director of Independent Thinking Press, Dave Harris, to the stage, who will be talking to us about wonder and curiosity in learning. So if that applies to you, then stay involved, stay concentrated for this next hour or so, and Dave will 10x your thinking around how to integrate wonder and curiosity in your tutoring, in your education. So as a brief introduction, Dave is, as I mentioned, Managing Director of Independent Thinking Press, an incredible organization that seeks to challenge leaders and educators, prompting them to go further and do more for their communities and students. If you don't know how wonder and curiosity are intrinsically tied to effective tutoring, then you have come to the right place today to be part of Dave Harris's workshop here. Over many years as a head teacher and now as an associate for independent thinking, Dave weaves in a passion for bringing about change in education with a deep understanding of what it means to think differently. You'll be hearing more about that concept over the next hour or so. And hopefully you will too by the end of this session. So a huge thank you to Nudge Education, as ever, for sponsoring the entire festival and for helping us to deliver what's been a pretty amazing program so far. And of course to Manning's Tutors, who are the sponsors of day 3 at this festival. Manning's are a key national tutoring program partner and have been working with schools for many, many years, well before the NTP started. So they're a wonderful agency and long-time training partners of Qualified Tutor. But that's quite enough from me. Dave, it's time to hand over to you and begin this 11 a.m. keynote.
Okay, pleasure and lovely to hear from you. Just to say to correct you slightly is that our company's Independent Thinking Limited. Independent Thinking Press is our baby. From that, it's where we do our publishing. But yeah, Independent Thinking, great, and it's great that, as I said, Nina, also part of us, is joining us straight after. So I will do my best to launch into my screen. We'll see if it'll work. So there's always that horrible moment where you think, oh, is it going to go? So is that on, Ludo? Can we all see that?
I can't see anything on screen. It says that you've started screen sharing, but no, there we go. That's it.
Now it says participants can answer. Yeah, there's no point in me starting with that. So you don't want to see my ugly face, so or not too much of it. So I'll get stuck into this. So this is it is a really important topic. I've worked for many years in education, and it's a realization that's grown on me over time about how important this is. And I think it's a great opportunity for me to be able to working with you as tutors who really are able to make a massive difference using this to the way young people see learning. So to move, oops, I can get it working. There's the title, Curious and Wanted to Help Learning, and the neuroscience behind it. Just a couple of 3 things about me. I've done a load of stuff. I've been a head I was a head for over 12 years across all phases of education. So I kind of understand what it means to be there. And I've always worked in the more deprived communities. And I still do some work now in a place called Stone Soup, which is a place for young people who don't fit into the education system, who have been, should we say, thrown out of other places. So therefore I work a lot with young people who don't see education as, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. And to me, that's what's behind a lot of my drive, is that I realize how important it is for us to help young people see that wonder. And I've worked in a number of countries and a number of places, and I don't say that in a boasting way, but just to say everywhere in the world I'm seeing a similar issue. So I think our debate needs to be about what do we want learning to be, not just in England, in Wales, in Scotland, across the world. And I'm sure there's a number of you from working all over the world you'll fully back up the fact that the issue we've got is about young people and learning, and about what we perhaps think education is. And being father to a couple of daughters who are wonderful, wonderful human beings, but I've seen how difficult that world can be sometimes. And any of us who don't think there's a massive tsunami of mental ill health out there is perhaps missing the point. And I'm sure that as tutors is one of the key things that drives you, is that you want to change that, and you want to make young people feel as if learning is the most exciting game out in town. And I heard a wonderful quotation once that said that if we can make young people think that learning is wonderful and the best game in town, what we're creating is geniuses. And I love that definition of genius. The idea that if we can get a young person switched on and excited, we are actually unveiling the genius. And that idea that genius is not something that's intrinsic, but something that we help develop, is to me just wonderful, and helps, is what keeps me smiling, it keeps me going. So I've written a number of books with the help of the wonderful Ian Gilbert, who founded Independent Thinking. And it's now my privilege to work across the whole group, just trying to help schools and help young people and help organizations like this reach out and see the world in a different way. So for me, I love that, you know, that ancient curse, may you live in interesting times. And I think we've all had that happen, haven't we? Blimey, did any of us expect this? I remember I was working on a group called 2020 Vision back in the early 2000s, a group of head teachers who were supposed to looking at what we thought would happen in this amazing sounding 2020. And well, none of us predicted what happened. But I think we'd be very wrong if we thought that coronavirus was what had caused the problems in the education system. I just think it's really brought them all to a head and perhaps rather confused matters. But there is no doubt at all, as far as I'm concerned, that the world has changed dramatically. Any of you who are historians, and I was never a historian at school, which probably brings back to where we are now. I now love history because I realize that history is about human beings. And I didn't see that when I saw it just as a global set of figures and things to learn. But when I felt it and I loved it, that's when it came alive for me. And look into your history and you realize, oh, we had a new way of doing things for about 200 or 300 years called the Industrial Society. Now, the thing is, this is now broken. We've now got something completely different. We've got a new form of society. We've morphed into it. We can feel that. We see that. We know that things are needed. And the point I want to make to you really clearly is that your role as tutors is not in the world that was 20, 30, 100, 200 years ago. Your job is to help young people negotiate the world that's coming around us now. And this has a completely different set of rules. And one of the odd things that you've got to fight with is that your young people are working in an education system which is pretty much stuck over there in the industrial world. Yet, surely education is about helping young people negotiate the world we're coming into. It is just crazy that we're stuck in a system that's there. But I know you'll say, okay, Dave, very nice. I get your point you're making, but my job is to try and help this young person negotiate the system they're in. And I completely agree with you. You know, of course, we have to help people now, but I just think it's important before we start that look into how we can help young people negotiate the current systems. It's really important to understand why it doesn't fit. And I think that there is no doubt that it doesn't fit. And I think we're in a really strange time where if you ask parents and families, what do they want their young people to learn? Most will talk about something exciting that they want to get to. But they understand that they don't. I did a survey recently, and parents in general were saying to me they didn't care what facts the kids learned. They just cared that they were passionate about them. They actually said, as so many people say to me, yeah, and I don't mind whether they know that bit of culture, that bit of stuff, or whatever. All I care is that what they do know about is they care about, and that they have that passion. And to me, that's the key. That learning is actually about passion. It's about wanting to. If you're just learning facts for an exam, I'm sorry, there's no point. There is no point. And in fact, we do more damage because we damage what learning is. I learn every day. I'm in my 60s. I love life. I love learning. I love finding out new stuff. Now, isn't that what our brains set up for? And that, to me, is where I think tutors can have such a wonderful, wonderful role. Because at the moment, I think COVID has put a lot more water down our river, and it's really, people are frightened about trying new things. And all I want to do is give you permission today. So, you know what? Give this a go, try things, because it is the only way we're going to get there, the only way we're going to grow these great learners, which is surely what we're in it for. I bet there's not one of you sitting there saying, oh, no, I'm not worried about growing great learners. I just want to get them through their exams. Getting through an exam is on its own, has a limited use. Loving your work, loving your subject, and getting through your exam, now there's something that really makes sense. And I love that quote from Cockcroft, no one ever grew as a result of being measured. And if we are just seeing education as a way of measuring people, we're completely missing the point. Now, I'm sure you're sitting there going, no, I get that totally. So let's look at what we know about learning. And if you think about, go back to many of you who done any form of education will have come across Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, you might say, yes, that's 50 years ago. But you know what? Neuroscience has reproved this from a scientific viewpoint to be completely true. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is completely right. There is no point at all in us focusing on those higher levels to say, oh yeah, well, actually my job as a tutor is just to look at the cognitive needs. Absolutely pointless unless you have the other needs sorted first. And the most fundamental, those are the safety, the biological needs, the belongingness, and the love. And I think that we fool ourselves if we believe that our role is a non-emotional one. I think at the very heart of it, the whole point of learning has to be grounded in those wonders of being human and being wonderful. I love that picture because that reminds me of one of the schools I ran, which was a 3 to 18, and that was a maths lesson. Now, you could look at that and say, what on earth has that got to do with maths? But you know what? It had so much to do, because it was about making sure that maths was fun. And what was interesting is if you go back and look at the results after this kind of project, where we got a huge improvement in exam results. Now, we didn't do it for the exam results, we did it for the love of learning. But the love of learning is what produces the improved exam results. Now, of course, hard work is needed. So any of you going, oh yeah, it's all very clever, Dave, but we've got to learn this stuff. But learning is easy if you want to learn. Learning is easy when you see why you're doing it. Because learning is not a straight line. You'll have seen that wonderful image off Twitter. I don't know who drew it, but they get my round of applause. But I think governments around the world, and I say that plural and non-politically, governments around the world think education is the top line. They think kids actually just accumulate learning like bricks in a wall. Complete and utter rubbish, as you will, I'm sure, know. You do not go, oh, today I'm going to learn about sentences. Tomorrow I'm going to learn about paragraphs. Oh, and the day after I'm going to write a book. It doesn't happen like that. Learning is a much better version of learning would be that bottom line. When you actually look at the ups and the downs, that's what it's like. There are some days when young people will actually have learned less than at the start of the day. And it is completely possible to destroy learning. But the other side of it is, the wonderful thing a tutor can do is you can actually switch them on. I remember my one daughter who had real trouble in seeing, let's say, seeing the importance of doing stuff just for the sake of exams. And she was really disliking going through the art curriculum that she was doing. And she had a cover teacher who effectively sat with her and did like you would do. What he did was switched her on to the fact that it was wonderful and that it was interesting. And it might sound corny, but that 1 hour period actually changed the way she approached her work. It approached how she thought of a subject, and it changed the exam results she got at the end, just from one interaction that helped her to see. So please don't any of you go, oh yeah, but I've only got an hour, 2 hours, or whatever it is. You can change lives, and that's not being corny. And the other thing to think about when you're thinking about learning is remembering the worst. I hate it when governments and others talk about learning ladders. It's complete rubbish. We don't learn by climbing a ladder. The implication of that is if you miss a rung, you've lost it. Learning is done as a spiral. We revisit things. That's what the best way to do it. So don't ever worry about going over work again, but you're linking it in a different way. My gran spent her whole life in a one room. That was her whole life. That was her whole school life in a one room school, which is a school where she was in the same room from being 4 till she was 14 when she left. And she knew so much about geography, about the world. And I once asked her, how do you know so much, Gran? She never left her home in home area in Worcestershire. Yet she knew all about the rivers in the world and the capital cities. And I said, how do you know all that? And she talked about how when she was first in the classroom, she sat next to the globe. And then whenever somebody new came in, the teacher reintroduced the globe and introduced back to her. And then before she was a little bit older, she started to join in. And she developed her learning. By the time she was 12 and 13, she was leading the learning of new people coming into the class. She was absolutely living a spiral curriculum. Why? She loved the globe. She was fascinated by the globe. Therefore, learning became easier. And we can't separate those two things. So I want to focus for a few minutes. And if any of you, want to shout out or interrupt me, please feel free to. I will try to give you a chance to ask any questions at the end, but I'm also happy to be stopped. You can just unmute and shout, hey, Dave, can you answer this? But why a great tutor can change the brain? Let's just think for what on that. So promised a little bit of simple neuroscience. If you want the deep neuroscience, then people like Dr. Andrew Curran, who's one of our associates, who is a proper neuroscientist and has written the books on it, have a look at his stuff. But just as a real simplification, the brain is this wonderful squidgy thing, and I have one in front of me. You might see a little bit of it there. Put it in that a bit more. It is a wonderful squidgy thing that contains many parts. You could spend your life studying them, but from our viewpoint, the only important parts for us is for us to think about. Let's group them into three. And the group of three is the bit down here, the brainstem, which is also known as sometimes the reptilian brain or the primitive brain. Now that bit of the brain is fight and flight. Every living creature has one of those. It's the stuff that where your raw emotions come from. Is that someone saying something, or is it just a microphone on?
I think that was a brief microphone on.
Okay, not a problem. The second part is that wrapped around that is the limbic brain. And the limbic brain is really large in human beings. There are very few creatures. Dolphins have quite high limbic brains, and also very young pigs do, but that tends to die later. But we have an unusually large limbic brain. We always talk about the large neocortex, which is where higher order thinking occurs, but actually we forget the limbic brain. And I want to push that. For me, I would say the limbic brain is the key brain for the tutor, because what I think we're realizing is that the limbic brain is key in giving the base around which the neocortex can work. So crudely, it's no good us at all just saying, oh, well, our job as tutors or as educators is to focus on the neocortex. No, it isn't. The neocortex is incredible. We cannot do higher order thinking without neocortex. But you've got to want to do the higher order thinking. You've got to feel the desire in. And also, interestingly, we understand now what alert memory is. If I say to you all now, okay, what is the capital city of France? Now, you will all of you give me the answer of Paris. And I'm sure you've all done that either out loud or in your head. If I asked you that same question tomorrow, you will, and I was able to look in your brain and look at the neurons in your brain, I would find virtually the identical cells would light up. So in other words, the memory of Paris is a set of connected cells in your brain. Now, I'm not, to be clear, they wouldn't be the same between any two of you. So you don't have a part of the brain that is, oh, this is the Paris part of the brain, but your brain has associated part of it with remembering Paris. But the interesting, really interesting thing in my view is, until a few years ago, it would thought all of that happened in the neocortex. No, it doesn't. The bits that come alive, yeah, there are some in the neocortex, but there's an awful lot of them in the limbic. There's an awful lot of them even in the brainstem. So in other words, a memory is not just a higher order thinking thing. A memory comes into your emotions. You think about it. I bet sometimes you might walk down the street and you smell something and you think, oh my God, my gran. You remember an emotion from your grans. You drive down a road and you remember the piece of music that was playing when it played. Our brains have, learning is a template. That template is locked both into the brainstem, the limbic, and the neocortex. So what this means is, if we're fascinated and we love things and we're interested, if we have a hook into that template. It also explains why, if someone shouts at you, now I know as a tutor you're never going to do that, but if we have a kid who's been shouted at by a teacher or some other adult, let's suppose about not being able to do some maths, it is not surprising they can't recall that moment, because the moment that you promote movement and upset in the brainstem, you flood the brain and you stop the anchoring of a learning template. So the more you shout at someone because they can't learn, the less able to learn they are. Contrary, the more you love someone, the more you care for someone, the more you make someone feel self-valued, the more you make them go, wow, the more anchoring you get. And there's another interesting point in this, that the dopamine effect is if we actually now go from looking at the large brain that I was just showing you and go right down to a cellular level, at a cellular level, there's been, we know there's these wonderful chemicals in the brain. There's this, let's just focus on a couple of them. One particularly, dopamine. Dopamine has a really interesting effect. Too much of it and it's woo, it does us in. But an increase in dopamine has been found to really have an impact on learning, both before and after. Now let me just lock us into that for a second. Hold on. 15 minutes before and 15 minutes after, you remember something more. So in other words, if I can help a young person get a little shot of dopamine, I'm going to increase the chance of them learning what I say next, but also what I've just said. Absolutely messes with your head when you realize that, because you suddenly realize the power that we have. I suppose the way if you kind of have trouble visualizing why, the way I'd look at it is, if, you know, I frequently drive a lot. If I drove up the length of the M1 and somebody said to me, okay, Dave, what happened today at junction 15? I am very likely to go, don't know. There was cars, I can't remember. If, however, there had been a large pink elephant wearing a tutu with a bowling ball on their head on the bridge at number 14, I'm pretty likely to remember that. And I would say, you never guess what was at junction 14. There was this. It gives you an anchor point. It gives kids an anchor point. So your question is bound to be, okay, so how do I get a dopamine effect? And we'll come on to that in just a second. Another thing to put into that is this really old research, and you can probably guess that by the picture of Ebbinghaus, who's makes me look young. Ebbinghaus's research is a long time ago, but it's what they still use in apps such as Duolingo. What Ebbinghaus discovered was that if you tell somebody something, they forget it. Whoa, what a surprise. So here's a great revelation for you guys. You talk to, you help someone learn something tonight, there's a very good chance that they will have forgotten 80% of that within a week. Now, that could make you very depressed, but actually when you understand this more, you start to understand why this is such important and why it's so important with the topic of wonder and curiosity. What Ebbinghaus discovered is, yes, if you tell them once, the regression curves goes that dotted line and you can see levels off about 20–25%. If, however, you revisit learning 2 or 3 days later, the regression line is about 40%. Another 7 days later, it's 60%. Another 16 days later, 90%. Another 30 days later, and we get it to 90%, 95%. We do it another 60 days later, and we start to get it absolutely embedded in learning. Now add this to the facts I've just been telling you about the brain, you start to think, hold on, this makes sense, because if I get someone fascinated, if I get them curious, if I get them wanting to do this themselves, I revisit learning. Because the important thing is, I am not suggesting that a tutor or teacher has to do this every 2, 4, 16 days. We've got to help the young people want to revisit their learning by linking it to other things. And the more we can link things together, the more chance we have of embedding learning. So how can we help students learn? Making them laugh, making it fun. That child is learning. And boy, is he having fun. He's learning about so much. Why is it that we think that as we get older, we shouldn't do that? I can't help but think that's going to make a big difference if you play that to your young person. Just suppose, okay, you're working with them and you go, they go, you know, this is really important. This point is the most important. If you can understand this, it really is going to help you. And if you say to them, right, what can we do, guys? If you've told them a little bit of neuroscience and you said to them, you've got this brain chemical dopamine that if we can do this, it helps you learn. And you say to the kid, okay, what should we do? Just show us that video. Then showing that video alone will actually increase the dopamine, which will help cement it. If you don't have the video and you want to pat your stomach and pat your head and rub your stomach or do some silly activity like that, if you just want to have a laugh, if you just want to stand up and shake your legs, really doesn't matter. But what you're doing is creating a little dopamine shot. And this explains why it is that when you ask kids, what's your favorite lesson? And you'll often say, oh, you know, it's this teacher because they make us laugh. But we learn. When you go and watch that teacher, as I've done many times, what I find those great teachers use humor, but they don't use it very much, but they use it skillfully, as a cook would use seasoning in a dish. They use humor to promote dopamine. They use it to cement learning, to keep interest. And that whole idea that questions, that the questions we ask are wonderful. There's a great one, a great question here that I've seen. Why are a strawberry and a ladybird both coloured red? Interesting thoughts. You might think, all right, well, the strawberry red because it attracts us, so we eat it. Okay, but then why is a ladybird coloured red? Because ladybirds presumably are coloured red because they don't want to be eaten. So hold on, doesn't make sense. Now the answer is I don't know the answer to that question. Absolutely no idea. But that makes it a wonderful question. As a tutor, your role is not to give kids the answer or to get them to give the right answer. Your role surely is to get them to think. And I love that idea that we've got questions. Now, maybe the whole of life designation for the strawberry and there was so that we could make strawberry ladybirds. I've no idea. But whatever's the most important, the thing I'm absolutely sure, the most important thing is not knowledge, but the love of knowledge. And that, to me, is the thing to ask. How often have you asked your tutee, what's their favorite fact? Because isn't that it? If we've got time, there's lots of you in the audience. If we've got a longer session, I'd say, come on, everybody tell me their facts. But I know if we do that, the rest of the 20 minutes is going to be up and done, because the reality is that we'll fill it, we'll get excited, we'll talk about, I've done this at a conference, and you get people talking passionately about the reproductive habit of pigs, which is something to really look at if you're at all interested that way, or about dolphins, or about starlight. Absolutely doesn't matter what the fact is. What matters, it's your favorite one. Another thing that I got this from David Hodgson, one of our associates, concept tests, which I love this question because it's high-level physics. This was asked of physics graduates. So I'm asking you the same question that was asked of physics graduates. And my gut is we'll get the same answer. They didn't know. You all know if you heat a piece of metal, it gets bigger. We know that because bridges have to get space at the edge so that in hot weather they don't bend, don't they? So what about if we got a thin metal plate, cut a hole out of the middle, a circle out the middle like a polo? If we heat the metal plate, does that hole get bigger, get smaller, or stay the same? Now, isn't that an interesting question? Go on, I want you to show so that we can see that. For those of you I can see on the screen, put up a finger, 1, 2, or 3. 1 if you think it gets bigger, 2, and do it the nice way around, 2 if you think it gets smaller, and 3 if you think it gets the same, it will stay the same size. In other words, if the 2 pressures counter. I can see some 1s, I can see some 2s, and I can see some 3s. the reality is, when that was asked of physics undergraduates, they got 33% for each. In other words, they were guessing. Because we can all argue it gets bigger because the hole gets bigger. We can say, oh, the metal gets bigger, therefore the hole will get smaller. Or we can say the two things counteract. In actual fact, well done to the couple of you, so Sarah, who got one finger up, it does get bigger. And the reason you can actually explain it by, if you imagine, instead of a circle, if you made squares and you imagine having the squares connected and you pulled the squares out, you can see how it gets bigger. But most people don't think like that. But what a fabulous question. You can do it with some silver foil. You can get kids thinking and talking. It doesn't matter whether you've got the right or wrong answer. What matters is that you think and that you're curious. And Ian and I've seen the amazing Phoebe Gilbert, who's part of the people who are sponsoring today. Her father invented the thunks. If you haven't got them, go and look it up or get some of our, we've got books of them, we've got cards of them. Thunks are questions which don't have a yes or no answer. They model the role that I think teachers and tutors should have, which is not as providers of the answers, not of guess what's in my head, but actually making you think. Just think, is there more happiness or sadness in the world? What an amazing question. What is important is not the answer you give, because there can't be an answer, can there? For some people, sometimes it's going to be one or the other. But the reality that talking about that question, having young people talk about it, and whatever, if you're working just one-to-one, you know, if I read a comic in a shop without paying for it, is that stealing? If your young person says, no, of course not, because it's still on the shelf, you counter with an opposite viewpoint. And you talk about it, not as in you're trying to persuade them, but you're just exploring it. And that's what learning must be. Learning mustn't be about getting the exam that's on the exam paper. Of course, exam technique's important, just as driving technique's important. But it's much, the thing that goes before that has to be about the learning and about the want to. And I think if you can help young people see the world differently, you go a long way to helping them realize that it isn't just learning some facts. I used to challenge the staff of the schools I worked at to bring me something that they thought was too boring to teach, because I don't believe there's a single thing in the world that's boring. What is boring is how we think about it. And in fact, we had a wonder room, and one of the shelves was called the boredom shelf. And you could only put things on there that were boring. And the moment anybody else found it not boring, it got removed. Nothing ever stayed on the shelf, because it is not the thing that's boring. It is your feeling. You could look at, I'm surrounded by wonder items. I've got, if you can see this, there's part of it's a fossil. Now you could on one level say it's a lump of stone. But you know what? Isn't it amazing? It's an old aconite. It's billions of years old. From this, I could calculate the size, probably be 2 or 3 foot size. This, if I looked at the marks on it, I can feel, I can imagine, I can live, I can care about that. Why? Just because I'm open to the idea that it is not just a lump of stone. If you can help your young people realize that something is not just things for an exam, and I'm showing you pictures and images, these all important things. If you all know that's a picture of Adele, it's actually, very few of you will have spotted that it's actually a picture with the eyes on the wrong way around, because our brain doesn't see that. Helping young people talk about the way our brain works. Imagine giving that, for asking them to write their notes on one of those. You know, which leg do you put? You know, it's one of those you can't tell, has that got 4 or 5 legs? Where are the legs? But again, just doing that, if you actually open that up for the young people. You help them realize that you've got such an interesting way of thinking about their learning. They will talk about again, hey, have you seen these notes I made on my maths? All of these things, I'm just flick through them. You guess, if you Google or whatever other search engine you use, optical illusions, you will find thousands and thousands and thousands of these things that make you go, wow, I love that. Those are two identical pictures, yet you will all be thinking the one on the right is leaning over further. It isn't, it's the same picture. It's because when we put two objects together, we expect the parallax effect. The parallax effect is they appear to grow together. The fact that they don't when you repeat the picture, amazing. Again, stuff like that. Wow, does it make kids think? Look at, if you stare at that little black spot in the middle of the screen, the other colors will start to disappear. Go on, stare at it, really stare at the black spot. That's because your brain has this ability that things that are not stimulating it a lot disappear. Now, isn't that a good method for our learning? If we're expecting a kid to learn something they're not interested in, we've just said we can't even look at things that are not interesting. So how on earth can we remember them? So just enjoy the world of curios and wonders and excitement. Mate of mine, Dr. Matthew McFall, I appointed him as my agent of wonder when I was head of the school. Again, helps us realize that it's the objects. And I just want to show you a few objects. I'm going to just break out of this for a moment and then hopefully come back in it again, just so that you can see me a bit clearer. But just to point out that it's not got to be expensive. It's not going to be anything. This, take for example, I know that's a balloon, that cost me nothing. I got it from a party or something. But attached to it is a little strip of red plastic. I don't think you can see it there. And they cost about 50p each. They're called sound strips. And what happens is when I run my nail down it, I've put it to the balloon so that you can actually hear a bit more. A bit further, give you a chance to try and hear it. See if I can get it. I don't know if you can hear it saying I can hear it. It's saying Merry Christmas. Again, give it a real push. Merry Christmas. And if I do it fast, it goes squeaky. If I do it slow, it will go Merry Christmas. I've got various other ones that say congratulations, all sorts of other things. It works, it's a vibrations. But what a great start to a lesson. What a great start to making you feel, oh, God, look at this. I've got this wonderful cup that it's got like a finger in the middle. It is based on a Greek cup from 2,000 years ago. Just repeat that, 2,000 years ago. They used to pay people in wine. Sensible guys, the Greeks, but, you know, so if you've done it, and on reading, they say you get something like 8 cups of wine a day. You wonder how on earth they ever built such wonderful things, but I can only assume they did most of the work before they had their pay. But they used to, this was a cup that was supposedly used at the time, and it's got a mark inside, which is where you're supposed to fill up to. And if you fill up, you can drink from it completely normally. This finger thing in the middle doesn't seem to do anything. The moment you fill over that yellow line, and I'm not going to show you because I will get wet trousers, the whole lot empties out. And it's a very elementary siphon. In there, it's just, there's like a straw that goes from the bottom of there to there, and it's covered with like an upside turned test tube, you could say, and with a hole in the bottom. And all that happens is, the moment the liquid gets to that level, it comes out and siphons out onto your trousers. A beautiful bit of 2,000-year-old science, but out of that, I can get history, I can get social, I can get the questions. Is it right that you should lose everything when you make one little mistake? There's just wonderful things that can happen. There are great things to touch, to feel, to be. I mean, Nina, who you're going to be seeing shortly, introduced me to this. This is a wonderful thing, Kintsugi, and it's the art that you break something and then you rebuild it, but with gold glue and gold paint, and you make the item you've produced. Now, for me, this was working with a very special person to me who was having trouble seeing that her complex brain was perhaps the same, was something to be proud of. And this was a really strong way of saying, you know, sometimes things that are a bit broken actually come back and are more beautiful than they ever were before. Now, you tell me that you as a tutor is not going to find that has a huge effect on a young person. And I would argue, if you did that and you talked about some work, you can help them feel good about how they are and what they do. But I have got, I have a suitcase. So any of you who again, if there's a school that you know or somewhere now that wants some wonder sessions, I'll come along and bring. I've got literally hundreds and hundreds of items, many of which have, you know, scientific or other use in them, which just make you talk. This is this energy stick, something like £7, £8 from Amazon. When you complete a circuit, you can pack. What I do is I've got a room. The most I ever got, I think, was 60 people. If you get people to hold hands joining this, the moment that the circuit finishes and the last two people come, that joins up. You get a tiny microcurrent passes through a whole group of, say, 60, 70 people. But it's a wonderful way of working together, of talking about conductivity, talking about so many things. Even just the two of you, just sitting and playing different, when did it work, when doesn't it work? It's got such wonderful ways of using. Or another very popular one is this little thing here, that when you give your student the opportunity, you say, you've got to try and get this out of there. And they try, but you're not allowed to tip it up and you're not allowed to use anything pointed. And you've got to leave it on the table and you're kind of fiddling with it. You can't do it. And you go, oh, I can do it. Actually, all you do is blow over the top. And it's called the Bernoulli effect. It's why aeroplanes fly. You go over the top, it reduces the air pressure and that pops up. How does that, isn't that going to get learning over to the young person? I guarantee the young person then wants to try it and to talk about it. They start to understand it. And that idea of using objects is there. And any of you going, I don't think I can do, you know, I haven't got this thing, or I can't afford £8 or whatever. You can make some Mobius strip, really good example. Get a bit of card, join it onto itself, you know, just as a circle, and then cut down the middle. And surprise, surprise, you just get two circles. If, however, you make one slight change with it and you twist once so that you've just put a half turn in it, so it kind of looks a bit crooked now, and you join that with a piece of sellotape like that, so it's now looks like a bracelet but with a twist in, and then you cut down the middle. Oops. Not very easy when you're in a rush on the screen, but hey, here we go. And look what happens. You end up with one big circle. Put two twists in. In fact, I'm not going to tell you what happens when put two twists in. Something else. But you imagine you've done that as part of your learning. It took me 2 seconds to do. Just imagine you wanted to link two ideas together. And when you see the double twist, you'll find another idea for learning. You then give them this to take away with, or you get them to do it physically. You're accessing part of their brain that when they pick it out of their pockets again, they'll go, oh yeah, I remember that. That costs you nothing. We've all got bits of paper and bits of sellotape around. So just going to nip back on to my screen just to go through a few final thoughts, because I don't really want to go into dear Nina's slot. There is so much you can do. A lot of schools are actually putting wonder rooms in. As a tutor, why don't you have a wonder gathering? I've got round me now, as I said, we turn my camera, we see I'm absolutely, I could sit here for 2 hours showing you my wonder stuff, and you'd still be there. I have it around me because it fascinates me. It fascinates young people. It's a few things are just to finish on. The questions we ask, making things fun. Just imagine, to give this as an example, that's a stupid picture off the internet. A task for writing based around that is likely to be far more effective than one that we just keep as a dull, unemotional one. You know, having a bit of fun around learning is your best possible way of pulling it together. You know, there are thousands of these, but you'll be far better. I'm an old numpty when it comes to handling the internet and finding things. Yeah, I can find this stuff. You'll have billions of these things, but jump to them as your natural, not to the exam paper. The kids will use the information when they've got it and they want it. There is so much you can do. So I kind of want to finish off. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. It's utterly, for me, the strongest thing, remembering that you as a tutor have the chance to make that difference. It's not about the notes you make, it's about the things you do. Now, that's my contact details, and I'm happy for any of you to contact me. If you're a Twitterer, I'm at Bravehead. I would love to hear from you. If you want me to send you the details of where I buy some of my stuff from, I don't sell any of it because I would never make money from Wonder, but to be honest, I also pick it up at car boot sales and charity shops and anywhere. Wonder is you'd say, wonder's in the eye of the beholder. Almost anything is wonderful. You put an old-fashioned telephone in front of a young kid who's grown up on the digital. They're fascinated by how it worked and why it did. Wonder items are often hidden away in our cupboards. We don't think of them. So for me, to come back to it, please, if you take one message from today, is be so proud of being a tutor. But remember, your job as a tutor, it's not about getting kids to pass exams. It's about unleashing the genius. And remember, unleashing the genius is make them love the information, make them interested in it, make them fascinated, because they are never going to remember it unless they want to do all those repeating they've got to do. And they'll do that repeating if they're showing. If your kid is going around talking about this and showing this to all the adults they meet, they are going to be talking about their science. That's the absolute power of wonder and curiosity, is that it delivers the learning almost effortlessly. So any questions, any thoughts? I'm happy to take, Ludo.
Mandy Elliott just popped in the chat. You've reignited my everything, Dave, which I think is probably fairly relevant to most of the people.
Thank you, Mandy.
So you can contact Dave after this if you don't get a chance to hear at dave.harris@independentthinking.co.uk, or I popped his Twitter handle at Bravehead into the chat as well. Are there any questions that people would like to ask Dave? We don't have a huge amount of time, so just maybe one. I can see Julia's put her hand up. Go on, Julia.
I'm going to ask a wicked question, and you don't have time to answer it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So when you're a head teacher and you're running a school, not everybody believes in awe and wonder. Some people are still looking at exam results. How do you lead the adults to lead the curiosity?
You have to lead that, and that's exactly what I did. I was in a school where that happened, and we did. I slipped through the slide because I didn't have time. And when I work with head teachers, I encourage them to look at it. We did an item. We bought 50 cake boxes, numbered them all, put an item of wonder in each one, and we had this competition, and I gave £50. I was giving three £50 vouchers for shopping, so something anybody would want. And all the teachers had to do was to take it into their first lesson, open it in their first lesson, and they had to use it as many ways as they could, and with the kids' help, integrate it into their learning. And we had the most wonderful week of learning and the most wonderful insight that followed.
So
It is possible. You just have to do, if a head teacher embraces wonder, the staff will. If the head teacher says the only important thing is exams, then that's all the school will do.
So you caused them to jump in.
Yeah.
and then it did the rest itself.
Absolutely.
You didn't explain it to them. You didn't go in through their heads. You went through the experience.
Pretty much, absolutely. Well, you just say, come on, there's 20 quid, there's 50 quid voucher on this. What's the fun? And because the kids were involved, and this is secondary school, a rough secondary school, the kids were going, what's in your box? The kids were interested to find out and wanted to be part of co-construction of their learning. What more can you want?
Co-construction, fab. Thank you. Glad I asked.
Thank you so much, Dave. And to lead into that, we have a short video from today's sponsors, Manning's Tutors. That'll be a short video that we'll play just now. Don't go anywhere, because Nina Jackson is in the room and we'll be taking over from Dave in just a second.
Hi, Nina.
Okay, so that is the link in the chat to go and check out Manning's Tutors, today's sponsors, and a huge thank you once again to Dave Harris. Thank you so much for taking us through that. I almost feel like there's an entire room, as you said, of other objects and objects of wonder and curiosity that you could have called on there. So thank you so much for taking us through just a very small proportion of what you know and your experience of wonder and curiosity in learning. Don't go anywhere. However, if you are in this room